Hey, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. He was found lying outside a Baltimore tavern that doubled as a polling place. He was half conscious, wearing clothes that weren't his. Witnesses later said he couldn't explain who'd left him there or why he was dressed in garments that didn't fit. Oversized, dirty, and clearly swapped from someone else. His speech came out in broken bursts, confused, frantic, drifting into hallucinations. By the time someone carried him to the hospital, he was cycling between brief clarity and deep delirium. Now, right off the bat, the location raised suspicions immediately. It was Election Day, and that part of Baltimore was known for something called cooping, where gangs kidnapped men, drugging or force-feeding them alcohol, changing their clothes repeatedly, and marching them from one polling place to another to vote under different names. It was crude, unfortunately it was effective, and it was common enough that finding a disoriented man in the wrong clothes outside a voting hall set off every alarm. Nobody saw what happened to him, but his condition matched the pattern almost perfectly. For days, he never managed to explain where he'd been. He called out a name no one recognized. Doctors disagreed on the cause. Hospital records are missing or they contradict each other. The only clear fact is that he never recovered. And that man was Edgar Allan Poe. His final days remain a mystery with no definitive answer, but the truth is, the ending wasn't really the strangest part. His entire life, the work, the money, the constant struggle to survive inside the business of publishing, it was just as turbulent as the way his life ended. But how does a writer known for inventing mysteries end up leaving one behind that still can't be solved? Why would a life spent battling the economics of publishing shape the legend as much as the stories did? And on January 19th, 1809, how did the birth of Edgar Allan Poe start a journey that made his work and his fate impossible to separate? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date of the year has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, January 19th, that story takes us to 1809, when writing became a business. A baby named Edgar Poe entered the world under circumstances that weren't much clearer than the ones surrounding his death. He was born in Boston to two traveling actors. He had no stable home, no consistent income, and no dependable support system. By the time he was 2, both parents were gone, and he was taken in by the Allan family of Richmond, but never formally adopted. A reminder that he belonged, but not entirely. That uncertainty shaped everything that followed. Poe was brilliant, disciplined, and obsessive about structure. But he was also restless, defiant, and convinced that writing could be more than a hobby for wealthy men. That conviction put him decades ahead of the business that he was trying to work in. In the early 1800s, American publishing was a patchwork of tiny magazines, unstable payments, and editors who used writers like disposable parts. Most authors kept day jobs. The idea of earning a living solely from writing was seen as unrealistic at best and foolish at worst. Poe ignored that. He wrote constantly, edited newspapers, published stories and poems, pushed into criticism, and treated writing like a profession long before it was recognized as one. As he did, he discovered the economics underneath the craft: low pay, late pay, or no pay. Success didn't guarantee stability, fame didn't guarantee security, and influence didn't guarantee income. But Poe understood something the industry hadn't yet caught up to. Readers didn't just follow stories. They followed the person who wrote them. Personality, style, and voice mattered, not just the work itself. Poe wasn't just building a bibliography, he was building a name. It was a career defined by ambition, instability, and the belief that a writer could be more than a hired pen. but the business he depended on was barely a business at all at that point. The turning point came when Poe realized he couldn't survive by treating writing as a series of disconnected assignments. The magazine world was too fragile, editors were unreliable, and publishers expected writers to be grateful for exposure rather than for payment. Poe made the decision, unusual for that time, to turn himself into a brand. He leaned into the darkness of his work, the precision of his criticism, and the sharpness of his public persona. His reviews weren't polite. They were blunt, demanding, sometimes brutal. He didn't write as a background figure. He wrote like someone who understood the power of having a recognizable voice. And readers responded. His name began to carry weight, even when his finances didn't. At the same time, he pushed for something unheard of in American publishing, and that was predictable pay. He argued openly for standardized compensation, fair contracts, and international copyright protections. He wasn't fighting just for his own income. He was pushing against a system that treated authors as interchangeable labor. Poe saw the business model clearly. Magazines thrived on fresh content, but the writers creating that content were the least stable part of the equation. Then came the breakout. His poem titled The Raven didn't just make him famous. It proved that an author's identity could sell the work. People weren't talking about the magazine it appeared in. They were talking about Poe. And that shift, from the publication to the personality, changed what writers could be. For the first time, American publishing saw that a writer could be a product, not just a contributor. And Poe, intentionally or not, became one of the first authors to leverage reputation as economic value. For all the attention that Poe earned, the business behind its success barely moved. He was famous, and quoted and recognized in cities he'd never visited, but financially, nothing really changed. The Raven, the piece that made him a household name, paid him about $9. Not $9 per printing, $9 total. A poem that earned newspapers a fortune gave the man who wrote it almost nothing. That mismatch became the defining truth of his career. Poe built the modern idea of a writer's persona, the recognizable voice, the marketed identity, the public figure attached to the work, but he lived inside an industry that hadn't learned how to value any of that yet. Editors used his name to sell issues. Publishers leaned on his reputation to draw readers, but stability, royalties, and ownership were still decades away. Poe was a brand without the economic system needed to support it. And yet, he kept pushing. He lectured, edited, hustled for better pay, and argued publicly for reforms that would eventually shape modern publishing. Fair compensation and copyright protection and professional recognition. But he was too early. The industry wasn't ready. And when it failed him, the instability swallowed him whole. By the time he collapsed in Baltimore, Poe had proved the potential and exposed the flaws of the business he worked in. He showed that personality could sell, that readers followed voices, and that writing could be a profession. But he also showed how fragile that profession was without structure and rights and economic grounding. His legacy reshaped literature. His career revealed the cracks beneath it. And both sides of that story began on January 19th, 1809. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please do not forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting bsnsdailypodcast.com.
We all crave something new. At Hertz, new is what we're all about. New adventures, new experiences. When you book with us, you'll be cruising in our newest fleet yet. New features, new tech, and of course, that new car smell. All that wonderful newness, all with no strings attached. So go on, book your new car fling at Hertz.com. Your old car at home never has to know.